Good afternoon. Today I'm talking about a mixture of different ideas. Sometimes they are completely different, but what the thread that keeps them together is it's different examples of rewards and punishment and the patterns that happen. And what happens in these examples when rewards and punishments are being used. Favoritism, rewards and punishment, that is, or rewards, for certain people, certain groups, and so on, does not help one side over another, but rather it makes changes within the side it favors also. An example of this phenomenon is the favoring or rewarding of people who became Catholic in the 4th century by Constantine. According to this, the rich would save money by joining the church. They did so, and thereafter the emphasis on sharing for the common good steadily decreased, and the adherence to a worldview with a dichotomy between spirit and matter increased. In other words, the new members in the church, for economic gain because of the rewards, instead of joining for the original idea of Jesus, for the good for love of other people and for love of God. The purpose was an addictive one, an attraction to the rewards. And when Jesus used the word reward, he meant natural. I believe he meant natural rewards. Things that happen naturally, not money that's given by a human agent. So, in other words, the new members of the church, for economic gain, seem to have had a negative effect ideologically and on the things that were done in the church. Next example, Leo Tolstoy wrote about a type of codependency between Russian leaders of his day and individuals nearby who stood to gain materially by flattering the leaders in an exaggerated way. So that was their reward, that material gain. They did so, and this caused the leaders to continue to be very much out of contact with reality. So the leaders were receiving an exchange for a reward, another reward, which was the flattery. And this kept them out of touch with the reality of what they were doing. Tolstoy points out the effect of the Tsar's environment on their view of reality. Anyone surrounded by a similar environment would react in an equally absurd way. Part was the self-aggrandizement. We can see something like this today, I believe, in our president and how people around him, is what I understand. They say yes, sir, yes to his ideas. And he doesn't allow anyone not to be loyal. So he gets, I believe, out of touch with reality that way. Another aspect of this was the preparation of what Tolstoy called mass murder, without the seeming realization of what these leaders were doing, in other words, war. They were trained from childhood in these so-called arts, and the arts are today being taught in video games to children. I know a child that I know, he wants to play a video game with murder in it, has to do with this new game which has been invented. And a little 2-year-old girl wants to play too, so he's going to let her play too. And a 10-year-old, and he's 14, and they're all going to play together this game. Now, this is very typical today. These games that the children are playing not 24/7, but maybe 8 hours at a time straight, such as I forgot the name of it, but there's one that's violent, very violent, and he plays it 8 hours straight. That game, it's his favorite game, this boy that I'm thinking of. His favorite game. I don't know how many years he's been playing that. He told me about it maybe 4 years ago, so he's been playing it for some years, and so he's being trained in these violent arts. This is an example of evolution of a person. This dynamic is not limited to a personal level. It affects, there are syndromes going through large areas of societies. Okay, next idea. Scaife points to a moral base in keeping an organization from being addictive. Oh, I already told you this in a different video. I'm going to skip this. Okay, I'll go to a different one. During the 1980s, importation of food rose an average of 50% in Latin America and the Caribbean. Internal production fell. That was in the 80s. The agricultural situation in Mexico was the opposite of what it became in the 90s, in the sense that there was very low capitalization. Prices were falling, and the costs of fertilizer, seeds, etc. were rising. Many farmers went bankrupt. That was in the 80s, and their land lay dormant. In the 80s, the U.S. government was extremely involved in agricultural subsidy in the United States, to the point, and subsidy is rewards. They're rewarding because it's not being earned, that money, it's being given. So it's a reward, to the point where it became excessively costly in the United States. George Bush, a little later, had an agreement with farmers in Australia. The price they received for wheat was lower than the amount American farmers received in subsidy alone. So they were really subsidizing quite a bit back then, around 1990. Pedro Noyola, the Subsecretary of International Commerce in Mexico, said, in as much as subsidies, that is rewards, caused distortions and problems in international commerce, Mexico was not going to have subsidies. But his definition must have been very limited for the word subsidy. They can use all different words to say things, and it might not be so true, because there was extensive money being given out in many areas in Mexico around that time. One example of reward, and subsidy is a reward, is the large exemptions. That's the reward. May not call it subsidy, but it is a subsidy. There are exemptions for agriculture. That was in the early 90s, of which the Mexican Secretary of Treasury, Pedro Aspe, spoke. He also spoke, this is another leader, he also spoke of financial help, that is rewards, being offered for investment. So they were encouraging investment. They wanted investment, so they give rewards for it. At least some of these so-called instruments were engineered and are handed down from the Inter-American Development Bank. Maybe they got the investment for Mexico at that time. In Mexico, Nacional Financiera announced special interest rates, reward again, below the international ones on loans limited to purposes which are authorized according to official government policy. So they're manipulating the government policy, make up policy that they want. They say this is what we want, and then they reward. In this case, according to the policy, they're authorized, in this case, for raw materials and capital goods. That's what you're going to get your special interest rate for. You've got to go along with this policy. Maybe you don't need it, but that doesn't matter. You get a good loan. Maybe you don't even have to give it back. Who knows? So let's do not what we need or what other people need. Let's just go for the money. That's an addiction. Lower interest rates, that's a reward, show these agreements to be instruments of manipulation. Banco Internacional also had preferential interest rates, that is rewards, referring to another manipulation. They were only allowed for certain items, in this case machinery, raw materials, and services. Other financial assistance or rewards has been offered by Ban Rural or Solidaridad for forgiveness, rewards, forgiveness of past debt, that's a reward. But this is given on a case-by-case basis. So they're manipulating case by case, depending on whatever they are manipulating for. Carlos Salinas de Gortari, who was the president around that time, planned as of November 1991 to use tax money for agriculture. He was also to increase the amount of infrastructure related to agriculture and to allow loans, that is rewards, for the poorest agricultural areas. Now, doesn't that sound nice? But the fact that the people in the area are poor does not necessarily mean the land is. Some of their land could be the most fertile. And if the loans, that is rewards, go for equipment and not labor, which is the most probable, enclaves of impoverished people, that is communities, will be broken up more than ever, as many will no longer be needed to do hand labor in the fields. In other words, they have to leave town, go to the city. Machinery will do their job. According to Salinas, the reform is promoting, that's for sure, the capitalization of the countryside. Here he explicitly admits that his policy causes what happens. It's manipulating what happens. Instead of helping, it is actually exacerbating the poor people's situation. In one very poor area of the High Plains in 1992, debts were not being forgiven. That is, they were punished. Could the fact that machinery cannot be used in mountainous areas be connected with this lack of aid to very needy indigenous people with ruined crops? The reason Ban Rural did not help was that the area was considered to be disaster prone and therefore cannot be insured. It is also useless for big money making purposes. In this case, the poor with poor land were not being supposedly helped. But the way a politician might say it might sound one way, but if you study it, it might look very different. Okay, that's all for today, and thank you for listening.